So I was walking through Whole Foods the other day, and I came across this rack of brightly colored bottles and bags of pills and powders that was called microalgae DHA. So I picked one of these bags up and turned it over to look at the ingredients, and it said 500 milligrams per serving of docosahexaenoic acid. And I thought to myself, what is docosahexaenoic acid? After reading all of these miraculous things that this substance is supposed to do, like treat depression, anxiety, heart disease, help with the treatment of rheumatoid arthritis, and a variety of other things. So, ladies and gentlemen, what is the science behind docosahexaenoic acid? Let's talk about that.
Welcome to The Science Behind That with Atticus Hamilton.
Hello, all you scientists, and welcome on back to The Science Behind That podcast. I am your host, Atticus Hamilton, and as you heard from my different intro, today we're going to be talking about docosahexaenoic acid, or DHA, and we're also going to be talking a little bit about EPA, which is eicosaheptanoic acid, just because usually those two come together. Not always, and as I learned from Whole Foods, not all of those suppliers that produce DHA actually add in EPA if it's from algal sources, but we'll get into that. So today we're gonna, much like with the last episode, we are going to break this whole thing down into basically what is DHA and EPA, number one, or part one. Part two is going to be all the claims made about it. Part three, of course, is going to be analyzing those claims and seeing if there's actually literature behind it to back it up. And then part four, of course, is going to be the ending, thoughts about whether or not you guys should add DHA and EPA supplements to your diet, or just should you start eating fish for that purpose. So let's get into it. So you already know by now that DHA stands for docosahexaenoic acid and EPA stands for eicosaheptanoic acid. So what are these two things? Well, they're omega-3s. They're very specific types of omega-3s, very unique types of omega-3s that in the past couple years have gotten a lot of, traction behind them. They've gotten a lot of support from both the fitness community and from the actual scientific community, because there's been a lot of research into both of these compounds. So first off, what are the claims made about, what these things do? Well, there's a lot out there. And for the purposes of time and simplicity, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for me to talk, majorly about everything that it's claimed that these substances do. But we are going to touch on 7 different things. So people say that DHA and EPA together can treat depression, help with heart disease, infant development, rheumatoid arthritis, menstrual pain, Raynaud syndrome, and lupus. And so we're going to go through each one of those. I don't think I really need to explain in any further detail what any of those are, other than maybe Raynaud syndrome and lupus. So Raynaud syndrome is basically, it's a sort of condition where certain areas of the body, usually like fingers and toes, the furthest extremities, they feel numb and cold in response to either cold temperatures or stress. And usually what's occurring here is that small capillaries within these tissues and smaller arteries, they vasoconstrict, so they get smaller, and that limits the amount of blood that can perfuse to that area, and that causes that cold temperature feeling. And this overall process is called vasospasms. So it's when those capillaries transiently vasoconstrict. So they temporarily vasoconstrict in response to cold or stress, making the extremities feel cold or numb. And you can kind of visualize this if you have like a pulse oximeter, or a device that you put like on your finger that measures oxygen saturation in your blood. It will also measure the perfusion index of that tissue. And so usually if somebody has Raynaud's syndrome or Raynaud's syndrome, they're saying you pronounce it Raynaud's syndrome, then you're going to have a really low perfusion index, or if your extremities are just cold in general, that will result in a low perfusion index. But anyway, so that's Raynaud's syndrome. And then lupus, I'm sure all of us have heard of this in some way. Lupus is a chronic autoimmune disease, which is basically, it causes pain and inflammation in a variety of different regions of your body. And it's an autoimmune disease where the immune system is attacking those tissues. The reason this occurs, people don't really understand. If you just look it up on like the CDC's website, it'll say a person gets lupus possibly from sunlight, stress, smoking, certain medications, and viruses may trigger symptoms in people who are most likely to get lupus due to their genes. So it's a genetic thing, and we don't really understand what causes it, what activates those genes. So anyway, so docosahexaenoic acid and eicosahexaenoic acid are both said to help with both Raynaud's syndrome and lupus, along with everything else. So let's get into it. So we're going to first start off with depression, and if there's actually any literature that suggests that both these compounds helps with depression. So according to Mount Sinai, they say some studies show that fish oil reduces symptoms of depression. However, it is not clear whether DHA by itself has the same effect. Other studies suggest EPA improves depression. So that's Mount Sinai's sort of like, insert basic answer here. No offense to Mount Sinai. I do like what they do, but it is kind of a basic answer. So I did some digging and I found a meta-analysis called Omega-3 DHA and EPA for Cognition, Behavior, and Mood, Clinical Findings and Structural Functional Synergies with Cell Membrane Phospholipids. And this was by Paris M. Kidd with a PhD, I guess. I don't know. Let's see if I can find what journal it's a part of. Thorn Research Incorporated. Apparently, this was just a research review or a meta review of a variety of different, air quotes, alternative medicine therapies. So what they determined was that they found 7 double-blind, peer-reviewed research studies that were conducted, and 6 of those 7 reported significant benefit of the use of DHA and EPA in a quantity of 2 grams and 4 grams administered daily for 12 days in alleviating depression within an age group of 6 to 12 years. Now, other than this research paper, there is a lot of studies here that show a similar result. Like, for example, this study, DHA effects in brain development and function. While this doesn't specifically look at depression, this does talk about the importance of DHA in both early development and potential effects later on during childhood and adult life. And this research paper is called DHA Effects in Brain Development and Function, and this was published in the Journal of Nutrients from the Department of Nutrition, Exercise, and Sports, University of Copenhagen, Denmark, Psychiatric Clinic, Department of Neuroscience, Mental Health in Italy, and a variety of other places, including the Department of Psychiatry in Texas, blah, blah, blah. And this paper basically showed that DHA had a significant benefit in early childhood development, and we're going to get into that a little later. But this research paper showed that it has significant benefit in early childhood development, both fetal development and infant development, and that their data suggests that it may also serve a big purpose later in life with cognitive health, and that potentially decreasing DHA levels may have something to do with cognitive decline in relation to major psychiatric disorders. So I thought that was rather interesting. So just from the research I found, it seems like this claim that DHA and EPA may help with depression may have some ground. As with everything, other studies should be done, but it definitely looks like the research that is coming out about this is showing that the claims made about it may actually hold water, at least with depression. Next, I wanted to talk about heart disease, and going back to Mount Sinai. So Mount Sinai says that DHA and EPA appear to help improve outcomes for people who already have heart disease. They may also lower the risk for developing heart disease. Omega-3 fatty acids found in fish oil help lower triglycerides, lower blood pressure, reduce risk of blood clots, improve health in arteries, reduce the amount of arterial plaque, which narrows arteries and cause heart disease. And the American Heart Association actually recommends eating fish, particularly fatty fish, at least 2 times per week. And fatty fish would include like salmon, herring, lake trout, sardines, and albacore tuna. Although, ladies and gentlemen, I would advise against eating tuna because of the mercury in tuna. I don't eat tuna for that reason. If you must eat tuna, make sure to soak it in milk. Don't drink that milk, but make sure to soak it in milk before you actually eat the tuna. Anyway, so kind of going along with this, additional systemic studies have determined that DHA and EPA reduce rates of all-cause mortality, stroke, sudden death, along with cardiac failure. And so that kind of agrees with what Mount Sinai has been saying here. But the real question that I have anyway is, if this is the case, why is it that docosahexaenoic acid and eicosaheptanoic acid, why is it that those two do all these things? What is the actual physiological process that is occurring here to reduce plaque formation, to reduce cardiac or heart disease in general? And overall, what it appears to be is that DHA and EPA have a differential effect on LDL, which is bad cholesterol. And it appears to be where they essentially bind to this LDL and prevent the LDL from being metabolized by foam cells, prevents them from being metabolized by macrophages. And as we know from a variety of my other episodes on heart disease-related topics, it's when macrophages eat low-density lipoprotein, or LDL, and become foam cells that you get a plaque. And so the research here, published in the Journal of Nutrition, volume 139, issue 5, May 2009, seems to suggest that both EPA and DHA are able to inhibit that from occurring, thereby reducing the levels of serum concentrations of LDL and total LDL levels, along with reducing triglycerol in the blood. And additionally, they determined that DHA intake actually significantly increased serum HDL levels. And HDL is high density lipoprotein. And so overall, it seems like, at least this study suggests that the isolated dietary intake of EPA and DHA leads to differential enrichment in LDL due to interconversion. And moderate amounts of EPA and DHA are effective in improving lipid profiles of normolipidemic humans. Basically, they mean that moderate amounts, not excessive amounts, moderate amounts seem to be effective in reducing LDL, increasing HDL levels in people. And this study was conducted on 74 men and 74 men and women aged 19 to 43. So it looks like so far the first two claims that it helps with depression and heart disease seem to hold water. Now here we go with the infant development. So Mount Sinai says that DHA plays a crucial role in the growth and development of the central nervous system as well as visual functioning in infants. Breastfed babies with healthy mothers should get enough DHA and EPA in breast milk, assuming the mother herself has enough DHA and EPA in her diet. And so, again, I went to the literature to find out if this is true, or at least if the research concurs with this, because we can't really prove anything in science. We can only show support through data. And the data suggests that this is accurate. In young babies, and particularly in babies' brain development, DHA is vital because it fluidizes the phospholipid bilayer of neurons within the developing brain. So what does that mean? I know some of you are probably like, I don't understand what you said. Phospholipid bilayers, as we all know, are the membranes of cells, right? They're composed of a hydrophobic tail region and a hydrophilic head region. And that's why they orient themselves the way they do. So in high school biology anyway, I was always taught that how do you increase, or that in a cold environment you want to increase the fluidity of a cell membrane because that reduces freezing. And so how do you do that? You add cholesterol. But in a hot environment you want to decrease the fluidity of a phospholipid bilayer. And so how do you do that? You remove cholesterol. And this cholesterol is what gets in between the phospholipids and increases or decreases that fluidity. But it's not just cholesterol. And what it's been determined is that other phospholipids and other molecules like EPA and DHA DHA in particular, get in between the phospholipid bilayer, the phospholipids in that phospholipid bilayer of neurons, especially in developing babies, and they increase the fluidity. And so what does that mean? That means that the neurons, if they have a more fluid cell membrane, they're able to basically send out dendrites a lot easier and form synapses a lot more efficiently and at a quicker rate than otherwise. And so it's vitally important for developing babies because the DHA is actually a fantastic fluidizer, and it's because of that integration in the phospholipid bilayer that then facilitates the neurons to rapidly develop synapses with each other and rapidly form dendrites to form more synapses with each other, which allow for healthy cognitive development in babies. And so at this point, I want to mention that this is probably why people also say that DHA is important for overall cognitive function in adults. And this is probably the mechanism behind why the research is suggesting that as well. Because the DHA in particular I haven't found any studies on just the EPA yet, but the DHA in particular probably allows for more fluid synaptic formation, just like in the babies, in adults. And overall, if you can form synapses quicker and more efficiently, you don't need as much time learning one thing as you would otherwise. If your brain is able to form connections much faster than it would otherwise, you don't need to spend as much time learning that particular topic. Next is rheumatoid arthritis. So, small studies have found that fish oil may help reduce symptoms and inflammation linked with rheumatoid arthritis. However, it does not stop joint damage from getting worse. So, that's Mount Sinai. And in the research that I found so far, I would have to agree with them. There hasn't been a lot of research on DHA and EPA in particular, isolating those compounds and then testing them as an experimental study in particular. But the one I did find demonstrated that, where is it? Oh, there it is. That DHA and EPA together, and again, administered quantities of 2 grams to 4 grams per day, demonstrated a significant reduction in C-reactive protein in patients. So what is C-reactive protein? You could think of C-reactive protein as a beacon in a, I don't know, what's a good example? If you have an infection, think of that as a fire, right? And C-reactive protein is basically somebody pulling the fire alarm within the building, which alerts the fire department. And in this example, the fire department is the immune system, and the fire alarm is C-reactive protein. C-reactive protein is a messenger of the immune system. Basically, when you have inflammation, either because of an infection or an autoimmune disorder of some kind, C-reactive protein levels elevate. And it understates of elevated C-reactive protein levels, you have more inflammation. And so it's kind of like a feedback loop on itself, right? The more C-reactive protein you have, the more inflammation you have, and the more inflammation you have, the more C-reactive protein you have. And so small studies have suggested that, or have demonstrated that DHA and EPA in those quantities, 2 to 4 grams per day, was able to reduce C-reactive protein levels in a randomized trial of patients. Now, how that translates specifically to rheumatoid arthritis, I couldn't tell you. And I'm not sure if there's a lot of data specifically out there. Obviously, there's a couple small studies that found that fish oil in general, but DHA can come from a variety of different sources, particularly microalgae. And at the very end of the episode, I'll talk about that. But so there definitely needs to be more research onto the rheumatoid arthritis aspect. So I can't say for certain whether or not, we have a lot of data to support that claim. Menstrual pain, once again, according to Mount Sinai, fish oil seems to reduce the pain of menstrual cramps when taken on a regular basis. I couldn't find a lot of data about this one in particular. It seems like it's going to be a very similar situation to the C-reactive protein, where it functions, instead of reducing the levels of C-reactive protein, it functions as more of an antioxidant. But as for this claim, I couldn't find a lot of research into it specifically, so I can't say one way or another if it's a valid use. And then with Raynaud's syndrome, so several studies have shown that high doses of DHA and EPA, around 12 grams, can reduce sensitivity to cold in the fingers and toes of people with Raynaud's syndrome. With this, I would theorize that the mechanism of action with this is very, very similar to that with the circulatory action and with the nervous system. The DHA probably fluidizes the neurons within the pain receptors of the fingers, so they don't transmit as much signal saying, ooh, this is, really numb. because probably simultaneously it's increasing the size of the capillaries within the fingers. Because if you remember, Raynaud's syndrome is when you have vasoconstriction in the capillaries of your distal digits that results in the feeling of being numb or cold. And so it would be, I think, safe to propose then that the DHA is increasing the vascularity, is increasing the size of those capillaries, i.e. vasodilating them, so the tissue feels warmer because more blood is perfusing to those tissues in people with Raynaud's syndrome. The interesting thing would be to do a study with DHA and EPA in people with Raynaud's syndrome and people who just have cold hands and feet, after being outside in the cold, to see if you have a similar amount of numbness amelioration in both of those groups. That would be an interesting study. And then lupus, preliminary studies suggest that fish oil may reduce the fatigue and joint pain associated with lupus. Now, this is interesting. So, once again, if you recall, lupus is it's an autoimmune disease, right? So the immune system is attacking your cells, your own tissue. And what, again, was one of the primary messengers of the immune system? C-reactive protein. So we already have the data to suggest that DHA and EPA reduces the levels of C-reactive protein. Well, then it would be safe to assume that that's the mechanism that is occurring within lupus. In those primary studies, that demonstrated that fish oil, particularly DHA and EPA, may reduce the fatigue and joint pain associated with lupus. If you're reducing the levels of C-reactive protein in a patient with an autoimmune disorder, you're reducing the levels of inflammation, which thereby reduces the amount of pain associated with that. So overall, ladies and gentlemen, for the most part, it seems like the claims that were made about DHA hold water, at least in the most recent research out there. So, ladies and gentlemen, before we go, I just want to say, if you are thinking about consuming DHA and EPA, I'd first just try eating more fish. Particularly salmon and trout, fatty fish, because that has a lot of DHA and EPA in there. I would personally stay away from fish oil pills, and that's a personal choice. You can get DHA tablets that are made from algae, and they add EPA there as well. So if that's something you guys want to try, go ahead. Although, you know me, I'm a big advocate of real foods, whole foods. So, if I would start there, trying incorporating more fish into your diet. Otherwise, I'd look for algae, DHA, and EPA. You kind of want that EPA together because it seems like DHA and EPA function sort of together with a lot of these things that claims are being made about. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening to today's episode of The Science Behind That. As always, have a fantastic weekend, and I will catch you guys on Monday. Remember, stand up and question everything.